Stakeholder.
In gambling, an independent party with whom each of those who make a wager deposits the money or counters wager.
A person with an interest or concern in something, especially a business.
In emergency management, any person or entity with a vested interest in the survival and recovery of a given community. You.
Welcome to Stakeholder Prepping.
Welcome back to Stakeholder Prepping, where you are the stakeholder in your own survival. We are your hosts. My name is Chris.
And I'm AC. And today we are going to talk about something that probably keeps more people up at night than they'd like to admit. But we're going to talk about the nuclear fallout shelter, and specifically how to build one and not going broke doing it. So this is kind of the budget nuke fallout episode, because I think most of our listeners aren't going to go spend tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars on a nuclear fallout shelter. But I think most of them can see a reason why they would want one.
Yeah, that's right. This isn't the James Bond villain lair or, some billionaire's missile silo that's been converted in South Dakota or anything like that. We're talking actual real options for people with backyards, basements, or really just kind of a will to live through radioactive doom, if you will.
Yeah, and a couple of bucks in the bank, because this is like the budget survival episode. We're going to be talking about the culvert tubes and cinder blocks and dirt and creativity. So if your panic room has dirt on the floor and a camping toilet, then this is probably the right episode for you.
And I do want to clear this up pretty early on in the episode. All of our stuff is available on stakeholderprepping.com. All of our episodes, along with links to research that we do, is all available on there. But when we talk about nuclear, most people picture the blast, that giant fireball, the mushroom cloud, the scene at the beginning of Terminator 2 with the nuclear blast knocking people
when
off
she's
of
at the
chain
playground.
link. Yeah.
They decided our fate in a microsecond.
But then you look at other movies like Blast from the Past. Great movie. And
great movie.
I love that one.
That was a good what's not Gerard Butler? What's his name?
Brendan Fraser and Christopher
Brendan
Walken.
Fraser. Yeah, Brendan Fraser. God, he's actually really good in that movie. That's a great movie.
I still can't bring myself to drink warm Dr. Pepper, but that's what a lot of people picture, is just that nuclear blast. Sum of All Fears is another one that has a good portrayal of a nuclear blast. That's what a lot of people think it is, and it's not really the way that it's pictured in the movies.
No, it's not at all. And we're going to talk about that scenario first, I think, before we get into it, because unless you live next to, the ICBM silo, command center, or you're just really unlucky, you're probably not going to get vaporized. You're just not. The nukes today are not as earth flattening as we think they probably are. So let's talk about that and do a little bit of nuke math to put your mind at ease. So,
all right. So we're looking at the green nukes.
Right. We're looking at the green nukes, the efficient nukes, the nukes with a dialable yield. But the most common type of nuclear weapon deployed by Russia is what I looked into, because I kind of figured, hey, if we're going to get nuked by something, what's the most common one we're going to get nuked by? Unless it is the Sum of All Fears type thing, where like they just used one of our old ones.
Yep.
Remember, that was ours.
The vending machine nuke?
Built into the vending machine. Yeah, that was one of ours. But the most common one that's out there that could possibly be used against the U.S. is the RS-24 YARS ICBM. And for anybody that doesn't know, that's a intercontinental ballistic missile. And that is a MIRV. And that's I like that acronym, MIRV. That's so MIRV. And that's multiple independently targetable reentry vehicles. So a MIRV missile. And just so people understand how those kinds of things work, I think a lot of people don't get that, right? So a ballistic missile is just that it shoots up with its rocket engine, and then that rocket engine goes into outer space and stops the rocket engine part. And then if it's a MERV, a bunch of these warheads pop out, or some warheads pop out. If it's not a MERV, just that same rocket falls back to Earth, but it falls back ballistically, and just like a bullet, right? Like there's no thrust is no longer acting upon that object. Only ballistic coefficients, right?
Yeah, it would only be gravity and drag. And I think the way to describe this is an ICBM is a single shot out of a rifle.
Right.
So it has its own trajectory. A
Yeah.
MERV, it's that shot hits its halfway point and then becomes a shotgun.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. So I guess that drag is acting upon it, but lift and thrust are not. Unlike a cruise missile, which just has its jet firing the whole time and it can be maneuvered and all those kinds of things. So these ICBMs, these ballistic missiles, that's kind of what's most popular. So they go, rather than going straight towards their target, they go up and then they fall back down and just under gravity mostly, which kind of proves the world is flat if you think about it. Like the shortest distance between 2 points is outer space first. I don't know, that just doesn't make sense to me. But yeah, so MERVed RS-24 is kind of the most popular one, and the most of the Russian warheads are between 200 and 500 kilotons. So about half a megaton is kind of the normal biggest one. I know there's bigger ones out there, but if we talk about what's the most common one out there, it's between 200 and 500 kilotons. And that MERV technology allows multiple payloads to, warheads to fall on different targets simultaneously. And those are both mobile and silo based. So it can be deployed from a mobile launcher or like a fixed missile silo. But here's the cool thing is if you go to nuclearsecrecy.com/nukemap, and we will put that on our website, obviously, you can kind of pick a place and a yield. In this case, I picked a 200 kiloton explosion, and I dropped a simulated nuke right in the middle of San Francisco because no one will miss it. But I mean, actually, like if you like sourdough and chocolate, it's a pretty cool place, but there's not much else there. But it is sort of a peninsula, right? It's an island, so it's an easy spot to sort of map out what a blast would do. But the biggest part of that, the fireball radius that you think of, right? That's just everything inside that is just instantly vaporized, right? That fireball radius of a 200 kiloton explosion only has a 0.74 kilometer radius. That's not that far.
Yeah, doing that in very, very quick in my head conversion, that's what, half a mile?
Yeah, right around there. Yeah, probably right around there. Sure. Yeah, if
a little over
a mile
half
is
a mile.
1.2 kilometers or something, isn't it? 1.4. Yeah, you're right there. So it's not that far, and so that gives it like a 1.7 square kilometer area that's affected by that big fireball radius. And if we dial that all the way up to 500 kilotons, which is on the bigger side of what's commonly out there, that radius only goes up to 1.06 kilometers. So it's not that much area if you think about it in terms of where you probably live from a major metropolitan area. The most common nuke dropped right in the center of that city is only going to vaporize this stuff about 1.74 kilometers out. So that is that nuclear fireball that you see. That's the huge damage. That's the nastiness. After that, we've got what they call the heavy damage blast radius. And that goes out about 1.27 kilometers, and that's where you get it's funny, they measure this in PSI, like what's the overpressure in that area, which is kind of crazy. So that's about a 20 PSI overpressure. That's heavily built concrete buildings will be severely damaged or completely demolished. You've got 100% fatality rate in that area. And
That's kind of the benchmark for blast damage
that's kind of the benchmark
when
for
they're
blast.
analyzing it, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And then from there you go out. We've got what they call the radiation radius, going out to right around 2 kilometers. So that's where there's huge radiation. It's likely fatal. Maybe about 85% fatal. You've got really heavy damage to structures, things like that. Past that, there's a moderate blast damage radius. So that's what they call a 5 psi over average pressure. That goes out to about 2.7 kilometers. And that's most residential buildings are collapsed. The injuries are pretty severe. There's quite a few fatalities, but it's survivable for at least a little bit in that area. And then we go out to what they call the thermal radiation radius, where there's a lot of 3rd degree burns out there. That's about 5 kilometers out from the center of this thing. You're going to have a lot of 3rd degree burns, and you're going to have some damage to sturdy structures. And then once you get out past that, it's that light blast damage radius, and that goes out to about 6.9 kilometers. And that is kind of the edge of the effect of this explosion, the edge of the immediate effect. That's where it's like a 1 psi overpressure. So some windows can break, right? You'll get some window breakage. This can cause injuries in like the surrounding population, but this is not the everybody in there dies. So once we get out past, the 7 kilometer mark, it's very survivable. Definitely immediately, and quite possibly eventually if you play your cards right. So that's the most common kind of nuclear explosion we might see. And that doesn't take into account terrain. Because if you remember the difference between like the Hiroshima and Nagasaki event, that Nagasaki is very mountainous terrain. And so that blast didn't go near as far because you had the natural terrain blocked a lot of this stuff we're talking about right now. So I picked San Francisco because if you think about it, like kind of going downhill and just blowing out into the bay. But in that sort of situation, once you get past 7 kilometers, so what's that, like 5 miles? It's very survivable from a nuclear blast. So you only have to be 5 miles away. And now we're in business. Now we're talking about what are the things you have to deal with. How do you survive after that?
And that is interesting how it's all broken down. And I'm sure that Nuke Map does not take terrain into account when it doesn't have the supercomputing capability to.
Yeah, it's just a radius. You're not putting topo lines in there, right? They don't have a MyTopo engine, is what it is.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I do feel like it's interesting that that moderate blast damage radius, that 5 psi threshold,
Mm-hmm.
at I think it's 5 feet. A standard block of C4 produces 7.2 psi. Somebody is going to correct me on this.
Interesting.
I know they will.
Yeah, but that's not a lot. Yeah, that's crazy.
It's not a ton. So you've got way, way overpressure, but it dissipates so quickly. And most of your injuries from that light blast damage radius, that's going to be the flash went off and people are going to their windows like, well, what the fuck was that?
Right.
And
Yeah.
then they press their face up against the glass, and then that wave hits and breaks the glass and cuts their face.
Sure. Yeah. And even when you get all the way out to that light blast damage radius, it's amazing to me that just 1 psi will likely break windows. That's crazy. It just doesn't seem like that much, but because it's so instantaneous, it's just enough to break most, household or automotive windows because it's just totally instantaneous. It's not that much pressure, but it happens immediately.
Exactly. And that is something else, is if you do have hurricane rated windows or shutters, those are rated for, I believe, 4.5 psi.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
So they'll take a beating, and you won't have broken windows if you've got hurricane rated high velocity hurricane zone,
Yeah.
Miami-Dade County
Yeah.
rated stuff.
Yeah.
That's not going to break under that.
That's interesting. So after that, once you get past that, then now what are we dealing with?
Yeah, this is the other part that a lot of people think about is you have to deal with the fallout. And that's fallout in its most basic form is radioactive dust and debris that gets sucked up by the negative overpressure of any blast. Um, and in a nuclear blast, it becomes irradiated, gets soaked with radiation, and starts putting off its own, and then it rains down like glitter's evil cousin. Uh, it's just you'd want to talk about unicorn farts and rainbows. Well, they're nuclear, so that's what a fallout shelter is for. It's shielding you from gamma radiation. Most specifically, it's gamma radiation, that ionizing radiation. And even though nuclear fallout is still going to be a concern, its its immediate and long-term effects vary depending on the size and the type of the nuclear event. Like we mentioned, modern nukes are a lot greener than the ones that have been used before. There's not as much radiation fallout per capita per kiloton or megaton or whatever measurement you want to put it in. They're almost self consuming and they don't put out as much long lasting radiation to deal with. They do a lot more damage on the immediate impact side, but so much more of that radiation it's almost like it's consumed by the blast itself. So distance from the detonation is going to make a difference. um, when we're looking at how a dialable yield nuclear weapon, that 200 to 500 kiloton bomb, essentially they're designed to have a yield that's correctly sized to vaporize most of their own fallout, but they're also target specific. You're not going to drop a 200 kiloton weapon on something that requires 500 and vice versa. Um, there is kind of that Goldilocks method used in designing them. So it's not too much, not too little. It's just the right amount of absolute death and destruction.
It's just the right amount. And yeah, that's exactly right. That they're sort of designed to kind of eat most of their own fallout because they're designed more efficiently now, right? Like science has come a whole long way in designing an efficient weapon. And for better or for worse, that just means that, you know, radiation doesn't really benefit anybody. Like even the victors aren't really benefited by um millions of years of fallout on their target. So they're designed to be very efficient, but they're designed to vaporize most of their own fallout. But we are going to talk about that. There still is there's those gamma rays, man. There still is fallout, and gamma radiation goes through everything. It goes through drywall. It goes through that little fiberglass shed. So you need mass between you and the fallout. And when I say mass, I mean things like dirt and concrete and water and steel and sand, stuff that can absorb and scatter those rays. And that term, modern nuclear fallout, I'm using quotation fingers, but that refers to those radioactive debris and particles you talked about that are released after the explosion. And while that initial radiation decays rapidly, like within hours, some of those radioactive isotopes in the fallout have longer half-lives, potentially remaining hazardous for years or even decades in specific locations. So we're going to focus on those short-term effects. We're going to focus on that within the first few days and weeks after a nuclear explosion type stuff. We're going to focus on fallout that can be very dangerous, with radiation levels potentially dropping significantly in the first, say, 72 hours. And that's kind of what that normal fallout stuff. If you are in the fallout zone, those first 72 hours are what's most important. That's where you can get the most decay of that half-life. And in that zone, things are going to be unlivable in the first 72 hours and become more livable after that. So depending on a ton of factors, we don't really have time to go into in this episode. We're going to focus on that immediate fallout that is primarily composed of fission products and is more dangerous in that short term.
Yes, and the short-term nuclear weapon fallout is very different than something like Chernobyl or
Right.
Fukushima, where it's that ultra long-lasting nuclear exclusion zone that it's constantly pumping out additional gamma radiation because the nuclear fuel that, for example, Chernobyl, uh, it just kind of melted and is sitting in a pile at the bottom of the basement of reactor 3, or yeah, it's reactor 3.
Yeah.
So it's just constantly pumping out more gamma, more gamma, more gamma. In a nuclear weapon, all of that is expelled and used in the explosion itself. So there's nothing more producing it. So your nuclear exclusion zone and those long-term effects are a lot smaller, uh, just because of the nature of the beast on that one. But let's break down what your actual shelter needs. So we're focused on the first 72 hours, which is where the majority of the damage and the radiation is going to happen. There's 5 real priorities here. So first is going to be your radiation shielding. And this is measured in a protection factor, kind of like your sunscreen SPF, sun protection factor, or PF. PF 100 means that you are getting 1/100th of the radiation dose. So that's the goal. You're turning a nuclear weapon into going to your dentist for an x-ray. You also need ventilation, so airflow without letting radioactive dust in. This one can be challenging. You need water, 1 gallon per person per day, bare minimum. More if you've got pets, more if you've got other things that need water. If you have plants in your shelter or anything like that, you also have to plan for all of their water needs. You're going to need food and supplies. Even though we're focused on the first 72 hours, I would say you need at least 2 weeks worth of food sealed in, ready to go, kind of at that moment's notice. And it needs to keep you alive so that you have the opportunity to get out of your shelter. And then this one is kind of a weird one to put on this list, but morale. You're going to lose your mind in a dark box if you don't plan for it. So you need flashlights and cards and maybe the DVD player that was at the end of
Leave the World Behind.
Leave the World Behind.
Yeah.
So you need all of those things, and the reaction time to get to this shelter, it may not be very long at all. You might only have 10 or 12 minutes to get to it. So it doesn't necessarily have to be huge or require 6-digit pin locks that have biometric scanning security to just gain access to it. You're not launching nukes in return. You're not creating a second strike facility. So
Although that would be cool.
It would be really cool.
But let's not forget, Chris, you'd have to have a way to deal with your poop too.
Of course.
You got to have a bucket, or, the sani toilet, or the chemical toilet, or the incinerating toilet, or the composting toilet. But you got to have a way to deal with your poo if you're going to be snuggled up with it for a week.
Yep. So let's talk some real builds. And these are all things that you can do depending on your budget. Let's start off with kind of the basement reinforcement method. If you have a basement, stack sandbags or concrete blocks around a corner of the basement, and then put heavy shelving or a solid door across the top. And then lay bags of dirt or books on top. You're building your own little fallout cocoon. This is advanced fort building, level 401 instead of 101. So this is your blanket fort, but with actual materials.
Right. Yeah, this is the blanket fort, sure.
And you can get it's a brand called Carney. They make air pumps or even a hand crank fan with filtered vents just to keep that air moving. You can get a radiation shield. And if you can build a small tunnel for your incoming and outgoing air and put an S curve in it, or a chicane, or a serpentine or whatever you want to call it, so the air can flow, radiation tends to move in direct lines. So if you can put some curves in there or even a spiral, it can't get in as easily, but the air can still flow.
Right. And this is kind of that classic Cold War move, right? Costs you basically sand, duct tape, elbow grease, and maybe your pride if the neighbors see you lugging 80-pound bags into your house. But yeah, this is that the Cold War method, right? You just stack up a bunch of this material that can absorb gamma radiation in your basement. And yeah, that's what a lot of people did in the 50s when they were really worried about this stuff.
Yeah, very, very true. That's where the movie Blast from the Past came from.
Right. Yeah, yeah, exactly. And so then the other one, the second one would be that they call it the earth berm shelter. So this is just digging a hole. You dig into a hillside if you've got one, and then line that with plastic sheeting, cinder blocks, and then top it with like scrap lumber or corrugated steel, and then like 3 feet of dirt. And this is something that will actually protect you. It seems silly, but it's just that mass. It's that mass to block that gamma radiation is all you need. And dirt is great at that. Dirt, steel, water, those kinds of things, sand. It's just really good at uh at blocking that. What was the HBO miniseries about Chernobyl? What was it?
Chernobyl.
Was it called Chernobyl?
I think so.
Was it really? God, I'm so dumb. I'm like, what's that movie about the man? He's super. But yeah, so
Oh, Batman.
yeah, Batman. So, but anyway, yeah, so that in Chernobyl, right? Remember, they were just dumping sand on that thing because that was just enough mass that could block enough of that radiation to basically stop the spread. But yeah, you just want that mass. So the earth berm shelter is simply that. It's just putting enough mass between you and that gamma radiation, like 3 feet of dirt.
Yeah, and it's the math on that is every 3.3 inches of packed earth, not loose soil, but packed earth. Every 3.3 inches of packed earth will reduce gamma radiation by 50%. And it's more molecules packed in there to bounce stuff off of. But if you do that 10 times over, so 33 inches,
Sure,
right at
there's
3 feet,
3 feet. Yep.
you cut that gamma exposure to less than 0.1%, which is PF 1000. With that, you just have to be careful. I mean, if you want to turn one of the old 53-foot shipping containers into your fallout shelter and just dig it into the side of a hill, that will work. And you can cover it and you can make your own little fallout shelter. But
Yep.
if you don't cover the door, you have protection on all sides except for the door, and all of that gamma radiation is just punching straight through.
It's
So
still
you
going
have
to get
zero protection there.
Right. So just don't park it under a tree that's going to fall on you or something like that, right?
Yeah, and check for groundhogs and other nasty things.
So the next one, the culvert pipe shelter, and this is really simple. Like you can buy a used concrete or steel culvert pipe from surplus yards, and then you just have to bury this thing that 3 feet deep, that magic 3 feet of packed earth, and then add an entry pipe and air vents. So if you just reinforce the ends of this thing, like with cinder blocks and rebar and things like that, then you are putting that 3 feet of earth between you and the outside world. And this is a pretty easy one. You could just, if you rent an excavator for a day and buy one of these steel culverts, then you're in business. Like you said, this is the fort building 401. Now you've got to start drilling the holes for your air vents and things like that. But really, yeah, if you just have a big steel or concrete culvert pipe and you can get that thing covered on all sides with 3 feet of material, then you're going to block enough of that radiation.
It's going to be small. It's going to be compact. You're going to need to stretch after spending a couple weeks in there. But yeah, I
For
found
sure.
a 6-foot culvert pipe costs right around $1,000 in a lot of areas in the country. You could spend more to have the contractors pull the build permit or the dig permit and dig it out. you could spend more on the labor to put the thing in than the actual pipe costs.
Oh,
But
absolutely.
you add a couple $100 in PVC pipe for air and water supply, and you've got a poor man's bunker.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, you just got to make sure that you slope the entrance so you don't have a radioactive slip and slide. But uh, yeah, it's really crazy to just look at the raw numbers there, Chris, because I see so many people that are just very worried about nuclear war, nuclear fallout. And I get that. If that's on your risk matrix, if you truly are worried about that, I get it. But this is a fairly inexpensive way to mitigate that. If that truly is something that's up on your risk matrix, you're less than $2,000 into a functioning fallout shelter that can actually block enough of that gamma radiation. If you're in that zone, if you're in the danger zone there, you can build an actual poor man's bunker here for not a lot of money.
Yeah, and I know I said it earlier. I do kind of want to put a disclaimer on shipping containers as far as putting them into the side of a hill. Um, Shipping containers are not great bunkers. They do have to be reinforced.
Oh, they're terrible. And dude, I have actually purchased and sold a shipping container in my life. And I will tell you that, yeah, every one of them leaks. Like, there probably are people out there that are using shipping containers and they're be very mad at us right now, but they will crush under that 3 feet of earth. They will. They heat up like ovens, and they offer basically no shielding unless you encase the entire thing in concrete. Shipping containers, they're just generally not ideal for use as shelters because they have some inherent structural weaknesses because they're square. They're not round like that culvert, man. I don't know. That's just like weird, like math that I don't really understand in physics, but the square is not that, it's
If you
just
ever
not that
did a
sturdy.
bridge building contest in school,
Oh,
high
yeah.
school,
Yeah.
that's the same concept.
It's the same thing. That's right.
Yeah,
This,
triangles are stronger than squares. Circles are stronger than triangles. So if you could build a perfectly spherical bridge, you would win every time.
right. Yeah, no, the square is not very it's just not very strong. And yeah, they overheat and there's usually the presence of some kind of toxic material. Um and they can be repurposed for stuff. People make homes and shelters out of these things all the time. But the problem is that by the time you do all of that, you're probably spending more money than just building something from scratch, at least for this argument. Because yeah, you've got a weak roof. They're just not designed for being buried. They're not designed for that, right? They have these points on the corners for stacking and transportation, but they're not designed to have 3 feet of dirt across them. They have very thin walls, so that corrugated steel wall, and the reason it's corrugated is you can provide a little more structural integrity but use less material for it. And that's not what we're talking about here. We're not talking about structural integrity. We're talking about more material. So they're just not great for a fallout shelter simply because of that corrugated design. They're super prone to rust and corrosion. Like I said, every one of them leaks, and they will all rust and corrode over time. And again, that is going to mess with the structural integrity. So I'm not totally discrediting them. There's probably people are going to be mad at us for talking bad about shipping containers, but people do turn them into usable structures. I get it. But for today's topic, it's safe to say that the time and money and energy needed to turn one into something usable, it just doesn't pencil out. So, like they say in Vegas, the juice just isn't worth the squeeze on something like that.
Yeah, and there's there's things that you can do like the culvert pipes, those are round. And they're
Sure.
made of almost the identical material, but they're usually treated or coated a little bit differently to resist wear and
Yep.
corrosion and rust and things like that. They also have that round shape, so they're less likely to crush.
Oh, yeah.
Um, if you actually look at how large scale nuclear bunkers like the missile silos or Cheyenne Mountain Military Complex or some of the ones that you can go out and purchase, they'll have square walls when you're inside because you're not seeing the round tube that it's all inside of. So they'll have storage under the floor and you're walking on a completely flat floor, but it's inside of a tube, so all of your storage is actually
Oh
curved.
yeah, they're just trying to make better use of that space. Because yeah, a circle is it's just a weird space to try to use. So I get it. Yeah, they make it square inside, and then you've got voids everywhere probably.
Yeah, we're not quite in 2001: A Space Odyssey yet,
Right,
but
right.
we'll get there.
Yep. So let's talk about some of the what are the shelter mistakes. I want to talk about the the dumb things people do. So let's not die dumb. We'll talk about
Try not to.
let's try not to die dumb. Not accounting for airflow is probably one of the biggest ones. You know, like, if you can't breathe, then you've just built yourself like a gamma radiation proof coffin, not a shelter. So yeah, you need filtered passive airflow, and that Kearney pump you mentioned, Chris. We should post some links to that because that's a good one. Um,
Yeah.
that's a good thing to have. Another one that's a big dumb mistake is not having water storage. So if you think about it, the 1 gallon per person per day at least, more if it's hot or if you're sharing your shelter with, your pets or your plants. So having having a gallon per day, that does stack up. There's a couple different ways to do this. Uh, they do sell those kits where it's just like the 50-gallon barrel that's food grade, and then it's got the little pump filter built into the top. That's something great to have here. But now you have to have a way to empty it and refill it so that water doesn't get scummy, right? You're going to want to cycle this out just like all of your preps. So maybe that big 50-gallon barrel makes sense when you're running your garden hose down there. But then the second you empty that thing, you're like, oh shit, now what do I do? So I like the water bricks are a great one. If you've seen those, Chris,
Yeah.
those are a great because they're kind of structural. It's like being back in college and you can build a couch out of the old pizza boxes. It's like that same kind of thing. These are structural, these little bricks. You can build them up like Legos, and you can make structure. You can make your makeshift tables and chairs and stuff like that out of them. But water bricks are really good. And then they have a little cool spigot. So you undo the top of those and you screw on a spigot. And I like those. And yeah, I think those maybe they're like, I don't know, 2 gallons a piece or something, but they're manageable. You can pick those up and move them around. They're like these little 2 gallon water Legos. So water bricks are a really good one, but not having water storage is a really dumb thing.
I did see a picture of somebody's fallout shelter, and all of the bed frames were made out of water bricks. So they were
Oh,
stacked too high, and then they built them into a bed frame and threw the mattress over the top of it. They had all of their water storage right underneath them.
that's a great idea. Or even just like, the legs to your bed could be made out of water bricks, and then you've got storage underneath or something like that. So yeah,
Yeah.
you can do all kinds of cool stuff with water bricks. Anyway, I like those. Those are a good one. And I've seen there's some other companies doing water brick like stuff, in different kinds of configurations and shapes and stuff. But yeah, water bricks are a good one. But just you got to plan. You got to plan for your water storage. Another one is forgetting that radiation enters at openings. So people will have this awesome buried culvert, and they'll just have like a straight pipe going out for an entryway or a vent. So making sure that you shield those vents and entryways is super important. And like Chris said, that radiation travels in straight lines. So that open stairwell is the gamma ray superhighway. So you have to plan on things like that.
I will say one way to combat that, if you are going to be in your shelter and you're going to be hopping in and out, which you should not be doing. Once you're inside that thing, you
Once
should
you're
be
in,
in it.
you're in. For those 2 weeks, you're in. That's the survivable place, right?
Yeah, but if you do have to be in or out, somebody brought it up to me that you could use lead, a half inch of lead, to stop gamma radiation. Well, it's not going to stop it, but it can dissipate it. And where
Hmm.
can you get a lot of lead in that type of quantity? You can go to a dental supply store and get the lead jackets that they put on for x-rays and stuff like that and build
Oh,
curtains out of them.
yeah, just like lead shot like that.
Yeah, and basically you're
Sure.
making a curtain for a man trap. So your first entrance, you go in, you go through this lead curtain, and then you go into your second entrance. if it's in your budget, that could be a way to mitigate some of that direct gamma radiation from hitting the back of your shelter.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, so yeah, using that lead shot and sewing that into something malleable and making kind of that lead curtain. That's a really good idea. Um, One of the biggest mistakes is just overcomplicating it. This is something when people think about this, they're like, oh, you got to have your fancy LED color changing lights and your Wi Fi and all that kind of stuff. You need mass, you need air, and you need water, and you need a plan. But that's it. That's all you really need. 2 weeks. I mean, food is nice, but the gamma radiation is actually going to kill you quicker than starving to death, believe it or not. So, yeah, you really just need those things. You need water, and you need air, and you need the mass around you to dissipate that stuff. And then the biggest one, you know, people have this "I'll build it when it happens" mindset. That's kind of common. And I'm a little guilty of this, not necessarily for like the fallout shelter, but just in general, because preppers are hoarders. The amount of like projects in progress I have right now is silly because I'm just like,
I
oh,
feel that.
and especially when you have room, like when you have the room for it, you're like, oh yeah, somebody's given away 52x4s. I need those. And then you've got them and you've got this idea of what you're going to do with them. And you're like, oh yeah, when I need to build that sniper's nest for when the apocalypse happen and Chris comes over, then yeah, I'll do that then. But it's a bad idea. And we all fall victim to it, is just having all of those projects on the back burner. So that's one of the big ones. Just saying, you know what, I'm going to build it when it happens, because Fallout hits in minutes to hours. And if you're just going to start digging when the nuke goes off, then you're just going to die tired.
Yeah, it's already too late. If the sirens are going off, and if the US were ever to suffer an ICBM attack, you would get notification on your phone. I guarantee EMS, or the emergency broadcast system, EBS,
Right.
is going to just be blasting every phone, whether it's on silent, do not disturb. It's going to go very wide and very.
I mean, they can find a way to wake me up in the middle of the night every time an 8-year-old goes missing, they're absolutely going to tell me when a nuke shows up.
And you have, by the time that goes out, gets to you, time of travel, you have about 10 minutes remaining, and then time of impact, you maybe have 15 minutes to an hour after impact to really seal yourself in.
Sure. Yeah, you're not going to build it when it happens. What didn't that happen in recent memory? They had a some kind of national defense issue in Hawaii. Remember, they sent out a text that there was
false nuclear alerts. Yeah,
there was a nuclear alert that came out because they said that North Korea had shot a nuke at them, and obviously that didn't happen. But they sent out over those emergency broadcast system and over text messages and stuff. So that's happened in recent history. I think we can point to that and say, okay, we know they're going to tell us because they told us last time they thought something was happening, even though it didn't. But you're right. They had a false nuclear reporting event.
And not to go too deeper of a rabbit hole on you, but what if that actually did happen and we just happened to skip that timeline?
Or what if it did happen and they just shot it out of the sky with one of those space lasers, and then they were like, actually it didn't happen. Sorry, that was fake.
That would be like the ultimate gaslighting.
Like if they took it down, because like North Korea would never like admit that they like shot one that didn't get to us.
Oh no.
No,
absolutely not.
Right. Yeah, but no, you're right. So that has happened in recent history, that they had issued a false alert, and sure enough, yeah, the everybody knew before the fake nuke didn't show up.
Yes. So let's talk about medical preps and exposure preps that you can have. A lot of folks ask if they should take iodine. And the answer is yes, but only at the right time. So an iodine is different than potassium iodide. I don't know if you want to go into that a little bit more.
Yeah, the potassium iodide tablets, right? This is the common one. It helps block radioactive iodine isotopes from being absorbed specifically by your thyroid, which is especially important for like kids and pregnant women. And this is the big one that I think a lot of people do this. They just buy the potassium iodide and they're like, yeah, I'll just figure out like when and how to take that when something happens. And I've heard, I have a personal friend who was a nuclear regulator. He did like, I don't know, just the poking around at some of the nuclear plants and making sure everything was going smoothly. And he told me once that people were far more likely to poison themselves with potassium iodide than to have it save their life from a nuclear event, because people just like you can take too much of it very easily and do a bunch of other damage to your system. So it's specifically to protect your thyroid. It's a good thing to have, but it's a really good thing to know how to use, because if you're just going to start popping potassium iodide like Altoids when like a nuke drops, you're just going to, yeah, you're going to die of potassium iodide poisoning and gamma radiation. So,
Yes. So what do you do if you get exposed to actual potentially radioactive dust, or for sure radioactive dust from the fallout? First thing to do is, once you're inside your shelter, pop one of those potassium iodide tablets and then immediately strip down to 0. Take all of your clothes off, assume that they are contaminated and they're just going to disappear. Put them in a lead lined bag and bury them, or shove them outside and wait for something to take them off to burn them. Because anytime you have ash that sticks in clothing or hair, you're going to have problems further on down the line.
oh, absolutely.
You need to get into and once you get into your shelter, immediately strip down to absolutely naked, run through your shelter, free as a bird, naked. And if you have the capacity to, take a cold shower. Don't let the steam come up, and rinse yourself off head to toe as much as possible. At this point, you don't actually want to do your normal skincare routine. You don't want to use abrasive soaps, or like I use Dr. Squatch soap.
Hmm.
It's got the little grits in it. I really like
Yeah,
it because it exfoliates.
right.
If I use that on nuclear radiation fallout, I'm just grinding it into
You're
open skin.
just rubbing it in.
Yeah. Same
Yep.
thing with your fingernails and your hair. If you were trying to shampoo your hair and digging at your scalp, you're just poisoning your scalp. You are better off in that case to have a wet, dry razor and just shave your head, male or female, doesn't matter. Get rid of it. It will grow back, and not in giant patches if you just shave it all off. But you've got to get rid of all of that radioactive dust and ash off of your body, or you're just going to continue to poison yourself. So uh, you need to take your potassium iodide within hours of fallout exposure for it to truly be effective. But you need to shower before you do that.
Right. Yeah, that's actually a really good call. And knowing how to use that potassium iodide. So do that like right now as you're listening to this, unless you're driving. Google the how and when and the instructions to use it, because those are things you're not going to be able to Google if the grid is totally down. And having the instructions, like I'm going to tell you, I'm probably guilty of this. Like I have purchased potassium iodide tablets, but I don't know like how often to take them and stuff. I'm sure it's in a book somewhere that I own, but I don't know right off the top of my head when to use them. So that's something that you need to know. Need to know when to use them. Make sure you're you're clear on how much to use, and based on your size and weight and all those kinds of things, it's probably going to be different for kids. And yeah, you just want to make sure you know how to use those, because that is really the only medication that's going to keep you safe from radiation. But also, I mean, yeah, if you are exposed to radiation, remember you're that can severely affect your immune system as well. So having things like antibiotics, you're probably going to be more prone to um, biologic and viruses, because that bacteria is just going to be easier for your body to get sick off of, right? If you've got a compromised immune system. So yeah,
And
having the antibiotics around is probably a good thing too.
if you were close enough to a blast where you suffered first degree, second degree, third degree burns,
Sure.
um, first degree is going to be your bad sunburn. Second degree is obviously blisters, very painful. Skin is peeling, things like that. Third degree, you won't feel it because it's doing nerve damage. But
Right.
as much as it's going to suck, don't use aloe vera on burns if you were exposed to the actual blast, because all it does is trap anything that was remaining on your skin in there. You're actually better off not using aloe vera and just letting it heal naturally.
Oh,
Um,
that's interesting.
Third
Because
degree burns, you're probably not
yeah,
gonna. That's gonna require an amputation. But second, if it's a minor second degree burn or less, don't use aloe vera on it. Just not
yeah,
worth it.
that's interesting. I didn't know that. So let's talk about some of the honorable mentions here. Like if you are urban, if you're an apartment dweller, if you're someone that doesn't have space in the backyard to go bury a culvert, there's still some stuff you can do here. If you live in the city or in an apartment, and options are obviously tight there, but you're not completely out of luck. One thing you can do, and sounds so silly, is you can actually line your bathtub with sandbags and kind of crouch low in there, and you can use like a closet or a pantry just like you would a hurricane shelter, and something that's got a lot of walls between you and the outside world. Books are a great one. You can stack books, water jugs, concrete bags, things like that, and you can actually make a makeshift inner shelter inside of your apartment with any dense material you have available. So water bricks are a great one because you might already need the water brick. So having water that you are going to use for other preps, like your hurricane preps, your earthquake preps, you can use that as your inner shelter, and it's just something dense enough that will block that gamma radiation. So there still are options if you don't have a space to dig out a shelter in the backyard.
And you, depending on your budget, you may also be interested in, or it could be worth looking into, ready-made prefab shelter options. There are a few kind of budget conscious ones. There's a company called Rising S Company. They're Texas based. They offer underground shelters starting at around 25,000. If you've got 25,000 in your budget, you're pretty well off. Atlas Survival Shelters, they do steel culvert style designs where they've got the storage in the bottom because it's round, but it's a flat floor. They do have some entry level options. They also do panic rooms that are secured rooms. And
Oh,
they'll actually come and do a quote for you and actually take measurements and show you exactly what they can do with what kind of space you have available.
sure.
If you are really, really that well off that you've got that kind of fuck around and find out money, um, you can get a survival condo or go and buy a nuclear missile silo that is a second strike facility and no longer in use. You can buy them. They're usually a million plus.
I've seen some recently, some like condos turned in, or missile silos turned into condos recently, on Zillow and stuff. And actually they were a lot more reasonable. I think people just don't want to live in an old missile silo. And obviously these aren't all Gucci'd out and stuff, but there are missile silos that you do find for sale sometimes. And so yeah, you could buy something like that. But keep in mind, like you said, Chris, if something happens, you have minutes, maybe an hour to get there. So as as a bug out location, it's probably not that great of an idea. This is something that's got to be readily accessible. So it either has to be the place you live, or you've got to, build that in your backyard. It can't really be your oasis, your nuclear fallout bug out location, because you're probably just not going to get there in time.
Yeah, and even, I mean, you could have an extraction team on standby 24/7 and have a helicopter on standby 24/7. If you're living in, you know, Utah and your fallout shelters in South Dakota, I don't know of any helicopter or plane that is that fast.
I mean, yeah, you're just not gonna make it. Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, that's just not an option. So you're either gonna have to live in your fallout shelter, or you're gonna have to have one. You're gonna have to have one very close.
So it really is all about planning. And look, this is not about living in fear. It's about having options when the unthinkable happens. We're not trying to fearmonger or be all doom and gloom. These are all viable, timeless options that you have at your disposal. And in a lot of cases, you have it right now.
Yeah, and we've said this before, but you prep so you don't have to panic. Choose not to participate in this event. If this is in your risk matrix, if you truly are worried about the nuclear scenario, it is survivable. So if you have a plan, then you can choose simply not to participate in uh that panic mode, in that, getting in your car and driving as fast as you can in one direction trying to outrun the mushroom cloud. You can choose not to participate in that if this is something that you're worried about.
And if you don't have a backyard, if you don't have, if you're in an apartment where you can't modify anything or anything like that, just look at it this way: a blanket, a bucket, and some bricks could still save your life.
Yeah, that's true. If you've built your own shelter, or you're on a budget or anything like that, if you've done something like this, I'd like to know about it. Like, hit us up. I'd love to see photos and hear the story if anybody has done this, cuz I do see people online often talking about that this is kind of one of those events um that they do worry about, something that they're fearful for, simply because a location. If you're located somewhere like close to an urban center that may be a target, if you're located close to the Pentagon or Washington D.C., or NORAD, a lot of people are worried, because they're close to those facilities. You may have already done something like this, and yeah, that'd be kind of cool. We'd like to see what people out there have already done.
For sure. You can always email us at stakeholderprepping@gmail.com, and we may end up sharing some actual ones on a future episode.
Yeah, for
But
sure.
as for everything that we've talked about today, AC, from culverts to concrete to potassium iodide, everything is going to be available on stakeholderprepping.com. Do you have anything else that you think we need to add on here?
No, no, not at all. I think we've kind of covered what we wanted to. And yeah, we'll put all this stuff on the blog. Any of the products that we've talked about, we'll put some links there on the blog, just so you can see, the kinds of things we've talked about, or that, like Chris said, that the pre-made bunkers that are out there. We'll put some links to that stuff, because you can just kind of see what's already out there, if this is something you really want to get involved in.
All right, perfect. Well, we will see you next week for our next adventure together. But until then, remember, you are your own stakeholder.